Moving on now, today the Zulu Nation will be holding an imbizo to discuss land expropriation in Ulundi, KwaZulu-Natal. The move comes amid calls for the repealing or amendment of the act that governs the Ingonyama Trust. The trust administers all communal land in KwaZulu-Natal on behalf of the king. If repealed, control of the land could be taken out of the hands of traditional leaders. But the Zulu king has urged his people to fight for what is theirs. He summoned the Zulu Nation to contribute to the debate to find ways to mitigate the situation. The Landless Peoples Organization of South Africa and 8 other organizations will also attend the imbizo. All right. Well, Dr. Aninka Claassens is a member of a high-level panel led by former President Kgalema Motlanthe on land issue that had made recommendations on the Ingonyama Trust. She joins us now via Skype to discuss this. Doctor, thank you very much for joining us on Afro Worldview.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, just so as a start, and of course just to clarify for our viewers, how exactly would the amendment of the Constitution, of Section 25 of the Constitution regarding land be in conflict or contradict the provisions of the Ingonyama Trust? And I suppose I'm asking you then to really explain to us what the provisions are of the Ingonyama Trust. We've always known it as something that is beneficial more to the Zulu king himself.
Yes, well, the section of the question of the Constitution and expropriation is completely different from the issue of the Ingonyama Trust. Basically, the Ingonyama Trust land is state land, and it vests in the Ingonyama on behalf of the beneficiaries, who are the people who live on the land. That's the same as the land of the Minister of Rural Development and Land Affairs. Just about all the communal land in South Africa, not all of it, but just about all of it, is state-owned, and it vests in the minister as the nominal owner. Now, you can change who it vests in by statute. So, you know, when the homelands were reincorporated into South Africa, apart from the land in KwaZulu, the old KwaZulu, because that was governed by the Ingonyama Trust Act. So all one needs to do, and this has happened many, many times in the past, is just pass legislation that explains who the nominal owner of the land will be. The real owner of the land are the people the real owners of the land are the people who live on it and have inherited it over generations according to customary law, or people who have got permission to occupy certificates on the land. And that's the essential problem, is that the Ingonyama Trust board, and one doesn't know if the king is fully aware of this, is taking those people's ownership rights and turning them into tenants and using the rental to bolster their own income and not ploughing that back into the communities.
There is a sense, and I suppose it's a narrative that I've been hearing, that it seems that the Zulu king is trying to sort of protect himself, and he's afraid of losing any sense of control due to any amendments which might happen due to the amendments to the Constitution. Is there need for him to be concerned about that?
Well, you know, I'm afraid that it is really just a kind of preemptive narrative on his part, because the high-level panel that I was a member of, I'm no longer a member of because it's now been disbanded, made hundreds of recommendations. This was one of hundreds of recommendations. They're all being considered by Parliament, and so there is no proposal at this stage. There's a report that recommends that Parliament consider amending or repealing the act. And that is, as the report explains, because the Ingonyama Trust is abrogating the rights of the people who live on the land. So this amendment is to help to ensure that those people have security of tenure as promised by the Constitution. So I think what's happening is that the Trust and the King, to some extent, are fudging the issue by trying to say that it is a question of expropriation without compensation. It's got nothing to do with that whatsoever, and saying that it's an attack on the Zulu people's land. It's an attempt to defend the Zulu people's land, given how many people came to the panel saying that their land rights were being converted into leases. And they signed leases in terms of which they have to pay rent And if they don't pay the rent, they lose not only the land that they've inherited over generations, but all the buildings that their families have put on that land. They also lose the land if they fail to fence it within a short period of time. So, you know, this is an extraordinary thing to be happening in a constitutional democracy in 2018, that you have a trust that, instead of protecting people's rights, is turning them into tenants. Now, they were called to Parliament. They were told in Parliament that this conversion of ownership to leases is unlawful, and they were ordered to suspend the issuing of leases, which they have not done, because they're dealing with this as a kind of tactic to actually take attention away from what they are doing on the ground to people's land rights.
Dr. Claassens, I mean, you sat in these panels, and of course you'd be privy to more of these conversations than the general public. I mean, you talk about the fact that there were some recommendations made, and of course you point out the fact that there were no proposals, and there haven't been any proposals at this stage yet, and this is really just sort of conversations, if we can put it mildly, happening at the moment. Take us through some of the recommendations, and I'm speaking particularly pertaining to an issue like what's happening now in KwaZulu-Natal. What were some of the ideas of how to? I've heard the Zulu King saying that he wants the people to fight for what is theirs. They're having an Imbizo today to see how they can mitigate the consequences of this. What were some of the recommendations in terms of this particular kind of situation?
The recommendations were that the trust, the Ingonyama Trust Act itself says that the board must preserve pre-existing interests in land. The Constitution gives effect to Section 25(6), which says that anyone whose tenure is insecure because of past racial discrimination is entitled to tenure security. So what we were saying is what the board is doing is flagrantly in contradiction to its own Trust Act and in contradiction of the Constitution and a law called the Interim Protection of Informal Land Rights, which says you can't undermine existing informal land rights without consulting the people concerned and obtaining their consent. And if they don't consent, you've got to expropriate the land. So ordinarily, what you would say is that basically the trust is not upholding its own law and the Constitution, and therefore it must change its practice. The problem is that the scale at which it's doing this is so extraordinary that, in a sense, somehow the misinterpretation of the Act has become a practice. And that is confirmed by the fact that when Parliament said, and the Trust has to report to Parliament, and when Parliament said stop issuing the leases, they refused to stop issuing the leases. So actually it's not just a problem that they don't understand the Act, it's that they have chosen to interpret it in a way that gives them the power to confiscate people's land rights. Now, when the King talks about a court case, there's no possible court case that they can bring, because there is no recommendation by Parliament, there is no bill. All that there is a recommendation to Parliament from the high-level panel. So again, I think he's trying to preempt litigation that would try to protect the rights of the people living on the land. And I mean, in a way, it's kind of like the VBS issue in Venda, you know, where the King got a whole lot of cars and helicopters and things from the VBS bank, and then afterwards said, well, you know what, things come from. And I hope the King doesn't end up one day having to make the same excuse, because he'll be in a very different position, because he's the trustee of that land. And he won't be able to say, I had nothing to do with the fact that vehicles were bought for me, or I benefited from personally, Dari.
Dr. Claassens, thank you so very much for giving us your time. Insightful indeed. Thank you for that. That's Dr. Aninka Claassens, Director at Land and Accountability Research Centre, who's been part of the talks on the issue of land. Interesting debates, of course, that we are having in the country at the moment. All right, let's take a short break. Do stay with us. The last hour of Afro Breakfast coming up next.